Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Doug Mall. I'm the Operations and Technical Services Manager at MCAT, Barcodes Group company. I will be giving a brief introduction today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sean, who is the Head of Global Strategy and Digital Partnerships at Google, who will give the bulk of the presentation today. We'll be saving some time for Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions via the Q&A tool. All right, so before we dive into Sean's material, I wanted to spend a few minutes covering the history of mobile devices and how we got to where we are with Android. So let's go back in time a bit. The last major mobile platform shift was almost 20 years ago. Before moving to Windows, everything was DOS. There were no options other than text-based data collection. Maybe some of you remember the Telzon PTC 960 or the Intermec 2425. These were examples of popular devices in the late 90s and early 2000s. At that time, terminal emulation dominated the enterprise world and wireless standards were still in flux. Let's look at some of the other popular technology around that time. Maybe some of you remember playing Mario Kart or Super Mario around then. The Nintendo 64 had just been released. Also, the first ever Palm Pilot had just hit the market. It had 128K of RAM, but could later be upgraded to 1 megabyte if you were willing to replace some of the internal hardware. Note that this is still 4,000 times less RAM than the average modern device. In the early 2000s, the first devices running Pocket PC and 2003 and Windows Mobile appeared on the market. These devices are probably going to look a little bit more familiar to everyone. The MC9090 and CK30 were especially popular, and I know some of you are still using these models. This was a big change. All applications needed to be rewritten. After an initial panic, reactions were very positive as users began to take advantage of improved hardware and software. There's a pretty good chance if you had a phone around then, it was one of these. Of course, the height of mobile applications in these days wasn't Google Maps or Facebook, but we did have the Snake game. So after 10 to 15 years, device hardware has changed, but the Windows Mobile and CE platforms have remained largely constant. Since 2010, enterprises have bought more than 15 million mobile units, 99% with a Windows embedded operating system. CE7 and Windows Embedded 6.5 platforms, the last iterations of the Windows Embedded platform were released in 2010 and 2011, and mainstream support ended in 2013 and 2015. So like the great migration from DOS to Windows in the early 2000s, we've reached another fork in the road. So let's look back to roughly 2015 first. Where do we go from here? At this point, mobility had taken off. In 2013, for the first time ever, mobile web traffic eclipsed desktop web traffic worldwide. The mobile market as a whole had exploded. By now, Microsoft had effectively left the marketplace entirely. Windows Phone made up just 0.15% of the install base on mobile devices worldwide in 2017, and Windows Mobile was below 0.00%. Microsoft did have both Windows Phone and Windows 10 IoT, if you're familiar with them. Both platforms didn't really have a migration path from the older Windows embedded operating system, though. So like all other options, they would require developers to completely rewrite applications. On the consumer side, Microsoft's Windows Phone platform never really took off and peaked with only 3% of global market share. In fact, in January of 2019, Microsoft officially recommended that users of the Windows 10 mobile platform switch to Android or iOS. So on the enterprise side, Windows IoT has been effectively abandoned, with developers not willing to invest in a platform with a bleak future and no existing adoption. Meanwhile, as everyone knows, iOS and Android have been dominating in the consumer space. Rugged mobile device manufacturers had a choice. iOS is a closed platform and isn't purpose-built for rugged data collection devices. So the market either could go to Windows Embedded and CE or invest in Android devices. So in 2015, there was time, and many considered Android immature from an enterprise perspective. In 2020, Android has truly reached maturity, and time is up for Windows CE and Windows Embedded. Next, let's take a look at how the rugged market has embraced this change. First, let's look at about 2017. Just a fraction of devices sold in the rugged space had Windows 10 IoT. Android had crept up to almost a third of all devices, but interestingly, warehouses and DCs were lagging behind. Why is this? We're seeing different reasons, but one of the main things is we see that software providers are needing time to catch up in this space. New solutions are definitely emerging quickly, though. So we would be interested on your feedback on this. If you know why your organization has not yet made the change, submit it in the chat and we'll review at the end. So that previous slide was 2017. Now in 2020, the market has spoken and the answer is clear. Android has been adopted. All major rugged manufacturers are effectively only releasing new devices on Android. Note that this graph is what is physically out there versus what is being sold. We checked in with one of our hardware partners, Zebra, and they said that 75% of devices sold in 2019 were Android. So in summary, moving to Android is not a question of if, but when. Note that depending on your software provider solution, the time may or may not be right for you to do that just now, but we've been having a lot of conversations with organizations one-on-one to help define the appropriate migration strategy. Definitely would recommend setting up an individual consult. So shoot us a note in the chat or reach out after the webinar and we can set that up. In general though, let's discuss some of the reasons why migration might make sense. So what issues are there with running on the old platform? Legacy mobile platforms are definitely reaching end of life. Security updates may be available through vendor support, but the platform actually limits what is possible. Syncing PCs has become more difficult without Microsoft support past Windows Vista. Satisfaction with the existing solutions is waning. Modern web apps can't run on these older devices. New solutions can't be retrofit onto older OS and hardware. And then lastly, there are changes in the expectations of the incoming workforce. Touch support is limited on these older devices, and the newer workers are not familiar with devices that feel like they're 15 years old. Keep in mind that some of these workers never even played a Nintendo 64 or know what a Palm Pilot is. All right, so top of mind issues. This slide shows VDC research survey results. The big items are speed and accuracy, getting information processed without errors as quickly as possible, technology modernization, taking advantage of modern hardware and software, labor optimization, getting new workers up to speed as quickly as possible. This is a big one, as worker onboarding is a big issue in today's labor market. In the warehouse, the current average onboarding time for a new worker is close to 4 weeks, and this can be drastically reduced with modern hardware and software. All right, so what does the new platform bring? Sean is going to speak to Android, but specific to the new hardware, we have a lot of new technology at our fingertips. Leveraging the modern UI experience for data collection only makes sense. There are several ways to do this with Android, among other things. New devices are more touch-based, have less physical keys. We can take advantage of gesture-based functionality, and new devices have larger screens. So this is exciting. The move from 90s era text-based data collection to touch-based solutions is possible with Android. There are several tools available that allow us to take traditional terminal emulation sessions and reformat them for modern devices. Taking text to buttons or icons is shown to dramatically improve worker productivity. This last slide shows some of the research done to prove that out. We're looking at typing speeds that are 39% higher, 60% less errors, and up to 15 to 20% overall improvement in productivity. So that's a little bit about the history of the Android migration and some of the exciting opportunities that the new devices bring to the table. Yes, looks like we've got some time for some Q&A. I've received a couple of questions, but keep them coming over and we can address them. A couple to get us started here. Sean, you spoke to it a little bit, but how does Android security compare to the Windows Mobile platform? I think in your slide, it didn't even list Windows Mobile, right?
Yeah, so I think from a security perspective, and I'm not by no means an expert in Windows Mobile, but I will tell you that, Android has really set the pace for security innovation. And so the things that a lot of organizations care about, like encryption as an example, we ensure that the device is encrypted by default, that any application data or other offline data, document data that you store on the device is encrypted. We secure those. And I don't believe this was actually offered in Windows Mobile, but please don't quote me on it, because again, I'm not an expert on Winmo. But we're adding things like trusted hardware, so a secure element where the generation of those encryption keys, the validation of the operating system, all of that's happening off device, which ensures that basically you have a higher degree of certainty that the data will be kept secure, that the operating system hasn't been tampered with. And then also what's relatively unique to Android is we expose a lot of these development tools, or security tools rather, to developers. So if you're trying to understand, has this secure element validated that the operating system is intact, you can query that directly. So you can know if the device has been rooted. You can know if the operating system has been tampered with. You can ensure that the secure element is actually handling your encryption keys. In fact, a lot of these tools are built into some of the Jetpack libraries that we talked about for development tools. So I think, from an assurance perspective, like, is Android going to be an enterprise class secure operating system? The answer to that is yes. And certainly security is an area that we continue to invest in for both the benefit of enterprises, but also the 2.5 billion consumers that use Android to handle a variety of sensitive tasks, whether that be their bank records or their health records or doing in-store payments or things like that.
Yep, and a related question here would be, our Windows devices seem to be working fine right now. Is there a date that they'll stop working? And that goes back to those platforms that are on the Windows devices really haven't been updated by Microsoft for years and years now, and the developers can do certain amount of patching and security add-ons to the devices that are out there, but only to a degree, because the base platform is not changing like it is in Android. So that's where these individual conversations are going to be really important, where we can talk to you and figure out what makes sense in your environment. There's things that we can do from a segregation perspective to improve your security by keeping these devices away from the rest of your network.
And I think one of the things I would also add is that,
to figure out how we can get the most.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but one of the things I also might add is, look, I understand that there's no kind of elegant and easy button, if you will, to move from Windows Mobile to Android. But I think this is actually a real opportunity for organizations to be kind of reimagining what their mobile workflows should be looking like. We talked about the Home Depot example, right? They could very easily focus on just the standard stock checking workflow that they've done for years and years and years, and likely, we're using tools like Windows Mobile to go and do that on. But companies like the Home Depot, like Walmart, are really not only just ensuring that the existing stock check workflows, the existing asset scanning workflows are enabled, but they're also adding additional new features. So, as in the Home Depot example, better predicting shelf outs. In the Walmart example, dynamically handling reorders from the store floor. And so when you start to kind of reimagine the process, this is, a really exciting opportunity to start from a blank sheet of paper, to be engaging with employees who are executing, your business processes every day. Ask them what hasn't been working with the tools they already have, and really deliver some tangible improvements from an efficiency and a user experience and a productivity perspective. And so not only are you gaining kind of a new platform that will be, getting security updates and has anti-malware and all that good stuff on it, but this is also the deep set of development tools that allow you to reimagine the workflows within your own organization.
Well said. There's additional questions about the ability to upgrade older hardware to the Android platform. What we're seeing there is some upgrade paths are available, but to very old versions of Android. So it can be done, and we've done it successfully as a stopgap solution. Again, I'm going to point you back to an individual conversation to figure out what makes the most sense short and long term on that. There are some disadvantages, though, with those older platforms. And then another related question, what older versions of Android are supported? I think you kind of touched on that with your slide showing the different levels of Android and what support was added. From the work profile and zero touch perspective, it's really nice to be on Android 8, I would say. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Sean.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that. So if you're looking at new devices, coming from folks like Zebra, um, a lot of those devices are shipping with Android 8 or even Android 9.
Right.
And so it's really an opportunity to kind of be looking at, what the latest and greatest is. Certainly, a lot of the thing I would add though is, some of the vendors out there have legacy deployments of Android. Using what's called Android open source. I would probably steer away from Android open source and toward what's called GMS Android. And Zebra and the Barcodes guys can and other OEMs like Honeywell and are all investing in GMS Android. And they're investing in that because of the additional development tools that we bring as a part of GMS, the security tools that we have, as a part of Google Play, as well as the app distribution mechanism for Google Play, and embedded applications like Google Chrome for browsing and all that good stuff. And so when you just are just using Android open source, you're just getting the operating system. A lot of the value add and a lot of the benefits comes through GMS Android, and so you'll want to be making sure you're investing there, not just in a minimum version of Android.
Well said. There was some confusion around that in the enterprise world because for a time, a lot of people wanted to be on the open source version for added security so that they didn't have to deal with the GMS side. But with the work profiles and EMM enrollment really being central to GMS, no matter what your EMM is, your enterprise mobility management solution, it really makes sense to be on that GMS platform.
Yeah, I think a lot of the folks, look, 6 years ago, I think the enterprise features of Android were lacking. But I think, going all the way back to, Android 6, really Android 6 and beyond, we've really worked aggressively to harmonize the deployment tools and the enterprise security features of Android. And then adding in, as mentioned, things like Zero Touch and Android 8 to really allow organizations to deploy quickly. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that we've been doing to better support enterprises within the Android platform.
Right. So I want to mention that, like I talked about in the beginning of the presentation, the migration to Android was kind of slow, and we saw a lot of the providers of hardware having to roll out older versions of Android compared to what we were seeing on consumer devices. We're past that now. The major manufacturers are able to come out with chipsets that are really future-proofed, that are going to be able to upgrade their versions of Android as time passes. And the other thing I wanted to point out is MDM and Android are really two things that go very hand in hand. So as we're talking about deploying Android devices, we definitely want to be talking about what MDM platform we want to manage those in so that we can deploy updates and keep the devices controlled. We've got one more question here about payment systems on the devices and solutions for Android and taking payment on mobile devices.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've seen a ton of folks use Android for point of sale, whether that's for cash register type deployments. So, using a combination of tablets and cash drawers to, handle point of sale or mobile point of sale, where you are, basically taking credit cards wherever you happen to be in the store because you've got the device in your pocket. There's a bunch of different folks that provide these types of solutions. I don't necessarily have a recommendation on one versus the other, but that kind of in-store payment processing use case is something we definitely see folks doing with Android. We also see, for those of you that have a digital commerce operation or an e-commerce operation, a lot of folks using kind of the reinvented point of sale workflow as a way to tie in and create an omni-channel workflow. So as an example, one large retailer has gone and said, okay, I'm going to go and process your credit card here for the thing that you bought here in the store. And when the associate asks, did you find everything that you needed today? And somebody says, well, I was looking for X, they can go through and actually go through the entire e-commerce site and process that transaction directly in the store and have the good delivered to the person's doorstep the next day, or however long it takes. Similar situation with another retailer where they're saying, hey, I'm going to try on a pair of shoes. The store associate can go and look up, see if that pair of shoes is in stock. Maybe they don't have that color, but they have the right size. They can get that person fitted, get the customer fitted, see if the customer likes those shoes, and then get the right color delivered again through the e-commerce workflow. So blending the digital commerce workflow with your in-store workflow is a trend that we're seeing become quite popular as well.
Perfect. Well, that's about all the time that we have. I want to thank everybody for participating, and I want to reiterate one more time that there's a lot of nuance and options available in this new world. So please do reach out to your Barcodes contact or using the contact information that you're seeing on your screen here, and we can have some follow-up conversations. But again, thank you and have a wonderful day.